Well, I am really delighted to be up here today with a great group of folks. I know I spoke with some of you all yesterday. Very briefly, to introduce myself again, for anybody who's new, my name is Monica Pless. I'm the new Agrarian Program Director for the Quivira Coalition. And I want to very briefly, I'm going to introduce who's on stage with me. I'm going to set a little bit of context of what we're going to be talking about, and then we're going to have some conversation up here and hopefully have a couple moments for one or two questions at the very end from you all. So this is our panel on training the next generation of farmers and ranchers. And I am joined here by Serafina Lombardi, who's the Director of Education and Outreach for the New Mexico Acequia Association. She helps implement their farmer training program, Sembradores, and she farms with her family in Jaramillo. And then I have Kelsey Ducheneau, the Natural Resources Director and Youth Programs Coordinator at the Intertribal Ag Council. She's fourth generation on the DX Ranch on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation and the owner of DX Beef. We have Dan Waldvogle, who's the Director of Colorado LandLink, which is a program administered by Guidestone Colorado. And I have Casey Holland. Casey is one of the instructors for the Grow the Growers Farmer Training Program, which is based at the Gutierrez Hubble House in Albuquerque South Valley. And she's also the farm manager of Chispas Farm. And we have Patrick Jaramillo, who is the Associate Program Director for the American Friends Service Committee and the New Mexico statewide farmer trainer for that program. So I'm excited to be up here with all of these amazing folks who, like me, are really interested in how do we pass on the knowledge of being really good stewards of the land, of producing a lot of food, and of being a good agrarian. And I'm excited to talk about this today because of the critical moment that we're at in agriculture. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, so the fact I'm just going to give is that farmers and ranchers today who are over 65 outnumber the number of farmers under 35 by a margin of 6 to 1. So to me, that's really crazy, and that's both a challenge for us to be able to really shepherd this movement and growing food into the next generation, and it's a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to bring people on into this field that I know all of us feel really passionate about. So part of the way that we got here, I think, is that agriculture, I always think about it as like agriculture. It was passed down through families. And for many of us, it still is. I know there's a number of amazing multi-generational ranches and farms out there, and that's incredible, right? There's such a rich history of agricultural knowledge in this room and out in the world. But we also have a lot of people who are not coming from that context. So I grew up in Mexico City. I grew up on the 7th floor. I literally could not touch the earth anywhere. And so for me to get into farming, and I started farming when I was, started working on farms in 2004, I had to learn everything from scratch. And so we're trying to think about how do we train that next generation through all those different people, whether it's a person who grew up on a ranch and, that's in their blood, it's in their muscles, it's in their soul, and how do we reach the other people who grew up in a different context? So as we think about that, I think a lot about apprenticeships as a piece of that, but we really need to develop this full career ladder. So not just getting the next generation in and getting them settled, getting them into their own operations and getting them land access and business planning, but also how do we support the generation that is trying to retire and pass on their legacy to their kids or apprentices or their successor. So a little bit about the new agrarian program. We're best known, I think our flagship program is our apprenticeship. We really see apprenticeship as this key part in that career ladder, as that hands-on, in-depth program where people get to learn by doing with experienced and enthusiastic mentors. And we have fabulous mentors in here. If you want to meet some of them, I encourage you to come to our Career Connection job fair later this evening. Many of them will be there. But I also want to talk a little bit about where we've been trying to go as more of a national movement. So we, in 2015, We got some support from Thornburg to do some research into the other agricultural apprenticeships that are happening around the country. And we joined with people, we did case studies. It got published into a book called Agrarian Apprenticeship, which, very short commercial, is for sale now in the bookstore. And out of that survey of 40 different agricultural apprenticeships, we tried to try and condense, what are some of the lessons learned? What are some of the best practices in that? And also, where are the gaps that we really need to find new programs or develop additional support for that? And from those surveys and from the case studies and conversations, we ended up joining up with New Entry Sustainable Farming Project, which is a farmer training program in New England, and with several other partners, including the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship, Rogue Farm Corps, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, and Velikas Farms Institute, and many of those folks are here, to form the National Ag Apprenticeship Learning Network. New Entry also has a national incubator farmer training initiative, and so we're trying with all of those to try and move the needle forward on making sure that these programs to bring support to new and continuing farmers continue to get stronger into the future. This year, we have put a online toolkit online, and we've put up a big map of different apprenticeship opportunities around the country. We have a listserv so that the people who are trying to do this work of training the next generation can get support from each other. And we've just had the second annual gathering as a pre-conference right before this conference, and several of these folks were here. We got to visit Grow the Growers and Casey's farm, and so we're really excited to sort of continue that conversation so that all of you know what's going on in some of these plans around growing the next generation. So, to summarize, critical juncture, great examples happening. So what I wanted to do is take this opportunity to sort of think about what we got from our ag apprenticeship gathering, get some of these folks on the panel to talk about what they're doing, what's working, where they have challenges, and where there are opportunities for all of you to engage in this work that is so important. So my first question for the panel is if people can introduce their organization or program and what makes it unique as a means of training the next generation.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here with all of you. The New Mexico Acequia Association, our mission is to protect our waters, our acequias, grow healthy food for our families, and honor our cultural heritage. And one small way that we do that, and a really beloved way of how we do that, is we have a Sembradores program. That's our farmer training program. And one of the things I think that makes it so unique is that we have a father-daughter team as our mentors. I don't know if Doni and Bardo are in the room right now, but Gonzalez family, thank you. You're amazing. And yes. It's going to be hard for me to be short. So just that, Edward is this wealth of traditional knowledge, and from everything from traditional ways to butcher to pest management, and Done is integrating in the hoop houses and season extension and the drip tape, and they are amazing. And part of what makes us unique is that we're so focused on New Mexicans and keeping New Mexicans on their land in traditional villages. And so I want to honor Essence and Gustus and Emily, who are apprentices who are here in the back. You are amazing, and we're really proud of you. And that we're really grounded in culture, tradition, spirituality, and trying to keep our traditions alive in a modern context.
Hihani Washte, everybody. Good morning. My name is Kelsey, as was said earlier, and the Intertribal Agriculture Council is celebrating its 32nd year in providing technical assistance and improved market access for tribal producers. We have always done that with youth and the next generation of leadership kind of at the forefront of our mind, and since 2016, work to serve as a catalyst or a facilitator for a youth-led, youth-taught movement, which since 2016 has grown to 800 Native youth from almost 200 tribes across the country. So we've coordinated 18 regional youth leadership events, a numerous amount of local events, 6 national events, and partnered with 8 other events across the country to really work to embrace the idea of agriculture and food systems as an economic development tool, a career pathway, and a way to heal the lands and heal ourselves, reconnecting to that culture that, existed from the land.
Good morning. My name is Dan. I am the director of Colorado Land Link. At Colorado Land Link, we focus on the human component of agriculture. We act as a conduit between farmers, ranchers, and landowners. We mainly do this through education and through focusing on where are those gaps in the ladder of work experience. Yes, we do have a matching service. That's definitely the tip of the pyramid for us. But really to get to the point where we can create matches and connect people is through focusing on readiness and education. We also provide a lot of technical resources and as well as work a lot on farm transition and succession and estate planning. We primarily do have a focus on beginner farmer and rancher issues, but we would be nowhere if we didn't work across the spectrum of agriculture and across the spectrum of producers, or as I should say, energy managers maybe. What makes us unique is we're a small organization. I myself pretty much cover the entire state of Colorado, and we really do have an in-depth focus of collaboration and partnership with other organizations, because I feel like that's the one way that we can actually be effective in what we do, by filling in the gaps and helping folks connect and keep our working lands in production.
Thank you. My name is Casey, and as was mentioned, I'm with the Grow the Growers Farmer Training Program, which is actually a partnership between a local farm co-op called the Agricultura Cooperative Network, as well as Bernalillo County. And our goal is to try to connect new and beginning farmers with county resources to enable them to successfully start their own food businesses on public open space land. And one of the wonderful things about the program is that it is really helping folks who otherwise do not have the resources in our own community, both technical, skill-based, and capital investment, to access all of this wonderful opportunity that the county really has and help preserve our agricultural heritage here in the Middle Rio Grande Valley, while also providing an outlet to more adequately compete with developers who would like to rather see these very large pieces of land in prime areas go to apartment buildings or complexes or things like that. So instead, we're able to help preserve that land. Something that is particularly unique about the program, I believe, is this partnership with the county and this idea of the county itself prioritizing getting people to feed their community and their neighborhoods. And one of our ultimate goals has also been to really plug these trainees into the existing network of farms, because we actually do have quite the thriving ag community here in the Middle Rio Grande Valley, and not just emphasizing that you get all this technical and land support, but also that there's this wonderful resources of knowledge all around us. And I believe we visited over 20 local farms here this year to do work days and everything. So really just kind of trying to encourage the idea of interconnectedness with everyone, while also utilizing our shared resources in the form of taxes on the open space. So that's been really wonderful.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Jaramillo, and I work for the American Friends Service Committee. Bear with me. Well, I can chat your ear off in person. I don't like talking in front of people. So I think come from a unique perspective in that the organization I work for and the work that we do is actually not based in agriculture. The New Mexico program is, but I want to read to you from our mission statement from the American Friends Service Committee. And it is: the AFSC is a Quaker organization that promotes lasting peace with justice as a practical expression of faith in action. And working with people with many backgrounds, we nurture the seeds of change and respect for human life that transforms social relations and systems. And the AFSC has been working in New Mexico since 1976. And we have been working in farming since 2009 with my mentor and the former director, Don Bustos. And so Don started the training program in 2009 in Bernalillo County. They did 3 years for a pilot program in Bernalillo County, and in 2012 we expanded to Doña Ana County in Anthony and Rio Arriba County in up north. And we did some work in Mora County. We worked on several pueblos, the work has always been, like Serafina said, about protecting land and water for New Mexicans. In New Mexico, the state owns the water, and to divert water, you need to put it to beneficial use. And the strategy that we've adopted is affirming that there is no more beneficial use than growing food. It's not watering golf courses. It's not making microchips. It's not building houses. It's not using for resource extraction. It's growing food for the people of this place. And so that's it.
So when I think about doing this work, to me, it's often not been motivated by money. It's often been motivated by passion. And so I'm wondering if you all can say sort of like, is there a fact and or an emotion that really motivates you and inspires you in this work?
The fact, my version of a fact, is that the land needs us and we need the land. And so our work is really based in relationships. And a lot of what we do is not just the agriculture, it's leadership development and policy work. We have our apprentices at the table with some of the most seasoned acequia advocates and leaders in the state. But that we know, as Patrick just said, for us, our lands don't stay alive if we're not caretakers of them, particularly in this system of Western water law with beneficial use. So the land needs us to irrigate and care for it, but also we're really at a juncture where we see our youth and our elders who have moved away from the land. That's part of our culture, that's part of who we are as land-based people, to be close to the land, to be in relationship. And so we see this as part of healing our communities and staying grounded. And my emotion would be querencia. Querencia in our sense of belonging to the land, having a sense of place to the land, knowing where we're from. Whether this is not the place where my ancestors were buried, but I have that sense of obligation and connectedness to the land. And for us, that's really key in what we're trying to cultivate anew, and why we're here in New Mexico. That's the heart of the culture.
So one of the unique facts about the work that I get to do is I get to work directly with the descendants of the original stewards of this continent. And really one of the emotional parts of the job is trying to help them overcome the wrongdoings that have been genetically implanted into the systematic oppression that they've experienced from generation to generation, and helping them get past that, reboot as a person, and reconnect with the land and the culture in a way that used to exist. I mean, sustainable and regenerative agriculture existed here on this continent prior to 1492. That was all that existed. Thank you. So it's really, really important that we look at these systems beyond when they were first settled, or we look at communities beyond when that town was established, and we analyze, what were these people doing? What was this land doing? And how do we reconnect that? It's inspiring to work with Native youth across the country. To work with any youth across the country is incredibly inspiring. One of the inspiring components to that is having to step back and realize that we don't get to reach all youth. As much as we would like to, we don't get to, because not every youth has a door to go knock on to find opportunity. So we really need to take that inspiration and focus on that and harness that in a way that doesn't drain us doesn't let the draining component of always trying to work against the majority get to us, so that we can continue to build more doors, that we can continue to offer more youth internships and apprenticeships and make those connections and make sure that there's something in place for the opportunity to knock on.
That's great. A fact, I would say demand. We can play all the greatest hits. We've talked about it a couple times today with the average age of a farmer and the land that's going to transition. In Colorado, well, this was about 15 years ago, there was a study done. We were losing close to 700 acres of agricultural land per day in our state, mostly due to development pressure. That's a staggering number. There's a huge amount of land that's going to transfer, but I think there is comfort in that opportunity for the next generation of farmers and ranchers, because there is that opportunity to be able to access some of these resources. What I am most comfortable with and what thrills me the most is the community. I think Carrie mentioned this morning, the folks in this room, we are not emblematic of those numbers and those ages. It's pretty remarkable. We don't have to transition this land at the end of our lives to a young person. There's opportunity to work together and integrate enterprises and figure out a way to reincorporate agriculture in general across our country and reinvigorate those rural economic biomes, if you will. So that's what thrills me the most, is that we have an opportunity to redevelop community across our country.
Yes, definitely following on what Dan was just saying, is that this idea of stewardship and resilience, even in urban centers, is something that I really appreciate about the work that we are doing. Now, a lot of the time, I myself did not come necessarily from an ag background and was very disconnected from the land, and it was by sheer chance that I happened into it so many years ago. And one thing that we've been really doing that really helps inspire me is finding folks like myself who also really don't have much of a connection to the land, and plugging them back into that, and reminding them about the importance of being stewards, taking good care of what it is we've been tasked with, feeding people, creating health in our communities, creating more green space in urban areas, and again, learning more about why these fields are empty or why they're going out of use, and then finding ways to then bring them back into use, and again, ways to plug back into the community to feed your neighbors and really learn from that. And this is, again, coming from folks who have never planted a seed before. Many of the folks in our program have no experience gardening whatsoever, and it's seeing that spark. There's definitely kind of a light that goes off in folks' eyes once they start to understand really that connection, that very real and human connection, that plants aren't so different from us. We very much live through the same cycles, and through this urbanization and this priority of disconnectedness, that we've lost that, and kind of reconnecting folks to that definitely is something that even on the hardest days kind of helps me keep going and really inspires me to continue finding more folks, regardless of how little experience they have, to again take care of these resources that are technically ours.
So it's a fact and an emotion. That's what all right. I'm not going to say anything new. This is pretty much the same, right? The fact is, the people of this land have been in relationship and in harmony in working and practicing agriculture in a sustainable way for, it's just for a really long time. And like I used to say, before, there was an old saying in Spanish. They would say that the God's in heaven, the king is in Spain, the Pope is in Rome, and we're here. Nobody's coming for us, nobody's coming to help. And people have been practicing sustainably and feeding their communities, feeding their family for a very, very long time. Before Walmart, before welfare, before USDA, people were doing all right farming. But now, with the help of the second largest bureaucracy, we're losing farmers, we're losing farmland, and in New Mexico, 1 in 3 children struggle with hunger. So, I don't know if I'm letting my politics slip out, but the emotion is that, you're right, like the connection. I read this quote one time. and again, letting more of my personal side, but the guy said, there's communion with God, and there's communion with the earth, and there's communion with God through the earth. And through agricultural practice, sustainable practice, we reinforce the relationships that we have with our land and with each other, and we strengthen that relationship, and it just serves to reinforce that we're all connected. We're not connected to just each other right here and now. We're connected to our ancestors, the people who worked this land before us, and the people who work it afterwards. So we have a duty, we have a responsibility to do what we can to be good stewards of the gifts that were given us. And I think that's my primary motivation. And we all need to eat, man, and it's fun. it's fun being out in the field.
So Patrick, one of those quotes, the quotes in Spanish, it kind of reminded me of another quote, and I'm going to apologize because this is probably a famous person's quote. I don't remember whose it was, but it was really impactful to me. It was like thinking about the food movement and the agricultural movement and regenerative agricultural movement and like bringing on being more self-sustainable. That sometimes I feel like we are looking for these leaders, right? We're looking for the Martin Luther King of this movement and like recognizing that we are the ones that we're waiting for. And so I think about like the people who are on stage, the people who are out here, like, yeah, we're here, we're doing it, and like, you know, we can figure this out and bring it forward. And so I think as we start looking forward, one of my questions to you all is like, where are the gaps? Where are the things where we need to start innovating? We need to start looking backwards to see like what are things that we've lost touch with that we need to bring back, and what are the examples that we see now that maybe are in other realms that we need to bring into the sustainable regenerative agriculture movement to make sure that we can sustainably perpetuate this incredibly important way of life, and you know, it really just is life itself. Like if we don't have this agriculture going forward, we're gonna be hungry, and I'm gonna be hangry, and you know, and then it's gonna get worse from there. So. Yeah, where are the gaps and opportunities you see?
I guess I'll start this. The gaps that I see is we don't live in a vacuum, right? In agriculture, we have to live. We live under a certain economic regime and a certain political system that does not prioritize farming. Yeah, like we've talked about that. We're losing farmers, we're losing land, and in this state, the state has put a dollar value on water, and we can't put a dollar value on our sustenance, and so, you know, we are like I said, we don't live in a vacuum. Agriculture producers are subject to a whole host of things, you know, access to capital, competition from agribusiness, you know, U.S. just ag policy, financial policy. It's really hard. We've started a couple we've started about 3 co-ops, and every year it gets harder and harder to find insurers that will insure a cooperative enterprise. You know, we're connected, right? We don't think about how is a small farmer in New Mexico affected by immigration policy when that's pushing price points down? How does it energy policy? So yeah, the biggest challenge I think, or the gap, is that also, again, this is not, I'm not a Quaker, but the Quaker organization, the dignity has been taken from labor, right? If you work with your hands in this, I don't want to say in this country, but broader society, if you work with your hands, you're kind of looked down on. And maybe that I know that's not true in ag circles, but so there's very little value for the labor that it takes to produce food. The only thing I can say in opportunity is climate change is scaring the heck out of a lot of people. And the fact is, you know, when that hunger starts and people start to realize, they pull their head out of the sand, I think that's the only thing that ever motivates people anyway, is their own self-preservation. So, I don't know what to say to that.
Definitely. So kind of building off of what Patrick just said, one thing that I am always looking towards the future on as far as a challenge is concerned is this idea of market saturation and how do we both grow new farms and farm operation and farmers while also still being able to let people pay their rent, right? Like, this is not an occupation that you get into to make a lot of money, and that's known. But in the meantime, how do you keep your electricity on? And finding ways, especially with such amazing existing farms that have been around for a while that already have their market niches figured out, and trying to find ways for these new farmers to really plug into that. There's only so much we can rely on direct to consumer sales, is kind of how I see it, particularly with the price point that we need to get in order to make it sustainable for the farmer to continue growing this food, particularly operating under capitalism, because that's all that's valued, right, is that cash money that you get at the end of the day. So what I have really seen as an opportunity potentially is this idea and concept that I learned about recently of anchor institutions, and finding places here in Albuquerque even that go through a lot of food that aren't sourcing locally at all, and that definitely have the money to take the hit to directly support local ag, and trying to see that lack of a market as an opportunity to access even greater markets that can, as a whole, particularly with groups, which actually AFSC was the kind of instigator to the start of the Agricultura Cooperative Network, which is technically like an aggregator. So each small member farm and allied farm is able to stay true to its values and treat the land right without having to get to the scale to produce what it takes to get 150 pounds of lettuce into the Albuquerque school systems each week, right? It's thinking about how do we create these networks of people who are then able, it's almost like a union, who are then able to negotiate for the prices that they need, for the lifestyle that we would hope that these people at the very foundation of our society are able to meet, and ensure success for these people that we are training into this career, that without that, they won't really succeed. So yeah, I'm looking at you, Hotel Albuquerque.
I couldn't agree more with that statement, and I do think that educating the consumer and having that conversation is extremely important. What I see as a huge gap and barrier across the Mountain West is simply the price of land, and that's nothing. That's not a novel idea by any means. I think at the advent of this country, we developed we didn't create it, but we really bolstered the idea of private property. Especially since the Homestead Act, I think agriculture has been extremely tied to garnering wealth through owning land. If you look at a lot of our older farms and ranches, a lot of those pieces of property have changed hands over the years. They probably changed hands during the Great Depression or during the farm crisis of the 80s. But if you go sit on an old ranch, you'll go to the car place and the price place and this and that. And these were little homesteads, and they couldn't make it on that little postage stamp of a piece of property out here at the time. I think somehow we have to change that paradigm to be able to garner wealth through a viable agricultural business. Now, that is going to be the challenge, I think, for the next generation of farmers and ranchers, and ways that we can work together to be able to share land use, have these pocket production systems that bolster enterprises. As a sole operator, I think having these conversations is most important. A lot of times I think sole operators feel like there's a ton of pressure to be able to take care of their help and be able to provide that paycheck even if they're not paying themselves some of those years. So how do we figure out ways to be able to make this work for more than one operator on a piece of property at a time? I will just say by working with beginning farmers, and it's not just young farmers, I have a lot of people I work with that have been working in a cubicle for the last 10 to 15 years. Some of them have amazing financial acumen. But I will say that beginning farmers have more ingenuity and creativity than most people I've ever met in this universe. So I think that's just, we're at the start of the conversation.
So when it comes to challenges or gaps, the idea that I'm going to present is the word risk. And I'm going to present that in two contexts. And my boss doesn't believe in me bringing him problems. He believes in me bringing him solutions. So then I'm going to talk to you about two solutions that can hopefully help to encapsulate what I mean in this concept of risk. And so the first is lack of access to equitable credit, or just lack of access to credit in general. And in that instance, risk is not necessarily always as a result of a faulty business plan, but as a result of the lending structure that has been put onto that business plan. And if we can reanalyze the fact that maybe the risk should be, look at the business plan, is it providing healthy local foods? Then maybe we should reanalyze the level of risk we're willing to put on it as a financial institution. And we're working to do that with Occupton CDFI, a native ag lending CDFI that is going to try to fill the void that we see in lack of access to credit to tribal producers. The second is in the form of youth leadership development opportunities. So it's risky to not offer these opportunities to our youth in a manner that they can access them. This is a phenomenal conference. Nobody in my Native Youth Connection network is here. It's expensive to come to Albuquerque. It's expensive to pay for registration. I'm so thankful to be here as a Herd Fellow, and I appreciate that opportunity, and I look forward to working with the organizations that have made that possible for me to continue to get more Native youth access to these opportunities, because that's when we're going to start to eliminate the risk that they're exposed to in their home communities that are lacking the youth leadership development opportunity and potential.
I think there's a lot of gaps and a lot of challenges, and I'm going to try and hit on ones that haven't been said already so well by everyone else up here. A lot of our apprentices are want to start operations on land that's been fallow. We have a lot of fallow land in our communities, and that land's at risk of losing its water rights and its value. And it's that initial investment. It's how do you make a living and get a farm started, and not get so sucked into a day job that you don't spend your time farming like me, except for when you go home and then it's dark. So it's challenging for all of us. So one is, just really looking at how do we get operations started. So after the apprenticeship, and I don't feel like we do a great job of this per se, is what do we do to really get folks in functioning farm institutions? We haven't come up with a solution, just experiencing that challenge. I think we have a lot of knowledge to gain from our elders, and we don't have a really systemic way to take it in. At NMEA, we have a structure. It's always based about intergenerational exchange. But even then, we just see that elder generation passing before our eyes, and how do we keep making more bridges and connections across the generations? And I think something that's like a challenge opportunity conundrum that I see is coming from subsistence-based agriculture. My family's been farming since farming came to the Italian peninsula. And it's in my blood to be a subsistence farmer. I don't want to monetize. I do not want to commodify the food. I feel so passionate about that. And we live in a capitalist system. Oh my God, how am I to live? I have a day job. But all my family, all we want to do is grow food. There's a need for food to be grown. We live in a community that needs that food, and yet we're not being valued as people who have those skills, that passion, the willingness to be harvesting chili in the rain before the last frost, which is what we were doing 2 weekends ago for first frost. How do we value that? How do we value the actual cost of producing food? That wasn't very solutions oriented, so your boss might not have liked what I had to say. But I mean, we're trying, we're on the ground, we're doing what we can, and we're brainstorming moment to moment and being creative, and that's what we have going for us at this moment.
So I talked to you all very briefly before we got up on stage. I also noticed that all of you in some sense have some experience also as a mentor. And I think that a lot of times when we're talking about training the next generation and apprenticeship programs, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the needs and solution for mentors. So I'm wondering, both from your experience as mentors or your experience working with a generation that is trying to create their legacy and pass it down, what do you see as hopeful or things that are working to support them in that process?
Okay, so 800 youth in the past 2 years in this network. I'm the only employee in our youth programs department. So that's really taxing when I'm working on writing grants and figuring out ways to keep the systems developing or expanding or reaching more new youth. How do I appropriately serve as the mentor to all 800 youth, right? I run out of time because I'm also trying to pay my bills and I'm trying to have a life with my family. So I think it's really important that we start putting value on the quality of the expertise that a mentor brings to the table. And while we don't like to monetize that, we sometimes may have to. And we may have to realize that my board of youth directors that represent 12 regions from across the country should be getting some sort of stipend for reaching out to all of the youth within their communities and trying to get them excited about agriculture within their local institutions. But right now, I don't have the money to do that for them. So we just have to start analyzing the concept of mentorship as we do internship and start to make it more affordable, more relevant, and valued.
I'll just speak to the value of, as coming from a mentee perspective. My grandfather lost his ranch in the 50s, couldn't pay the bills. I was fortunate enough to have a couple horses and some 4-H projects growing up, but certainly didn't come from a subsistence agricultural family. If I had not been able to find my mentor, who was my boss at the time and allowed me to try enterprises and fail with less risk and have those conversations, they were extremely honest. If my mentor wouldn't have been willing to share sometimes how little money they were making, and they were, a very established in the community, long 7th generation family. There was a perception that they were millionaires out there, but they're driving old pickup trucks and they were barely making it. If I hadn't had access to that mentorship, I wouldn't have the understanding of agriculture and wouldn't be where I'm at today. So I would just extend the invitation that whatever you have to offer to the next generation, reach out. I think there is an absolute expertise in mentorship, but also sometimes just honest discourse is extremely valuable.
So, one of the things that I've been learning to balance and have learned from previous mentors is this importance of finding a way to both continue the work that you're doing while passing the knowledge on. And that can be such a difficult balance to find, because when you are operating a business, let's say, and you have this person who comes on who doesn't quite know much, who wants to become empowered in their own way to try a new enterprise, to grow a new crop or something, it is very difficult to then find ways to fit that into your existing way that's been working, that will work, and find space for that. So definitely, I think finding a way to support mentors, perhaps monetarily slightly, for this risk that they are inherently taking when they are bringing a new person on, or to find ways to help them better balance their work and life difference. For me, I train 2 days a week, and then I have, a 4-acre certified organic farm to run the rest of the time, right? And so that is very important for me, to be able to bring that energy and lessons I've learned and new things continually to the trainees, to the folks that I'm mentoring, but also being able to go back and have that opportunity still, and not all of a sudden find myself in the situation where that's all I'm doing is just mentoring or training and not continuing to hone those skills myself, because it is a continual process. I will never know it all, right? It's impossible to know it all when you're working with natural systems, particularly in a changing climate, and facilitating both the growth of the mentor and mentee in ways that meet the needs, respectively, of each particular group, because mentees bring just as much energy and new ideas and vision to the farms that they're working at or to the programs that they're in, that needs to be respected, while, like I said, also managing to run a successful operation.
I would say that in terms of mentorship, there's a lot of things people have touched on, and one, in terms of growing food, I think there's one word that we get that gets lost a lot in kind of modern time, the idea of a vocation. And I think most agriculturalists, most farmers and ranchers choose this life because it's a vocation, it's a calling. At the same time, so are educators. You know, I mean, we make it really hard for farmers, ranchers, and for teachers. It's really hard. But people do it because they're called to that. I would like to give a quick shout out to my mentor. And I look up here and I see, Don Bustos' fingerprints is all over this state. A quick plug, the Agricultura Network was a product of AFSC. The Grow the Growers apprenticeship program is a copy of our the year-long training program. The Sembradores program is a model of the AFSC, the Doña Ana County, as well as those anchor institutions. The Agricultura Network was founded to aggregate the produce to provide for the North Valley cluster of schools for APS. AFSC is now providing or working with 8 different school districts to procure produce from local farms. But what I will say, we use like a popular education methodology, and that's why it's so important in terms of mentorship. It's a year-long training. It doesn't end right after just because the program ends, the learning doesn't stop. But that mentorship, the transmission of knowledge is hands-on. You have to, you have to learn most of it learn by doing, and you have to do it, and then you get the explanation while it's happening. The great thing about that is that trainees or graduates or people who went through the program, they're now mentoring other people. And that's the thing with popular education, right? We're generating knowledge, especially in a changing climate, especially with changing markets, changing demands. We're constantly changing things up. And so there's a little bit of we're constantly growing the knowledge base. We're constantly growing the capacity, and I know it's hard. Like, it's taxing. People are always asking, well, how do I do with this? I don't know. Don used to always say, just do it. And I mean, my uncle would tell me, he's like, everything I tell you, it took me a year to learn. Whatever piece of advice I gave you, it took me a whole season to learn that. And most often, the greatest lessons we learn by failure. Learning by doing, just walking the walk is and being the example. That was the other thing. The important part of our model is the demonstration. A lot of times in the service committee, we talk about accompaniment. We don't do things for people, and we don't do things for a community. We do things with, and we do things based on a model that has been demonstrated successful, right? These models of production, we use a mix of very traditional, ancient practices, but also very modern and sophisticated. Well, not that ancient models aren't sophisticated, but very modern, let's say. And we use those because they work. They adapt to different places, but they have to. It's up to the individual grower to take that knowledge and adapt it to their location. So the transmission of knowledge is slow and it's one-on-one, but once that happens, like I said, a lot of the people that have gone through the program, they're now teaching. I mean, the Grow the Growers program, I think Jedrick, Fidel, I mean, these were all students of Don and products of the program. So it's tough work, but it's still it's pretty inspiring when you see that happen.
I'll just add a few things to that. I appreciate you pointing that out, Patrick. It was in the initial list of things to do, is acknowledge AFSC is handing their model to us, and then we elaborated on it and kind of embedded it further in some community and cultural practices. But Don Bustos is my mentor also. It's why I moved to New Mexico, and I met my husband on his farm, and my husband was one of his first apprentices 10 years before me. So, the word that came up for me is reciprocity. And that my husband, now that things are slowing down on our farm, my husband goes every weekend and hangs out with Don and gives back. It took a while to get to that point where he had the time to do that, but giving back to all of our mentors, and also just emphasizing that when we do a cohort, we are really building a community of learners together. and our mentors offer a tremendous amount, but we expect them to kind of become that cadre of peer mentorship. So that ideally it's taking some of the pressure and the hierarchy down, so that they're going to each other's farms, they're reading things together and exchanging articles and experiences, because it is an infinite, there's no end to the learning curve. So reciprocity, that's my thought. Just giving back to our mentors and honoring them and naming them, naming where we learn these things and just paying that respect and homage.
I'm looking at Sarah. Do we have time for one question? Okay. Is there one question from the audience?
So I entered farming in my mid-40s. My wife was in her early 50s. Monica and I have talked back and forth over the years at the organic conference in Albuquerque. I understand that there's a gap. There's a lot of folks retiring, and there's a lot of young folks who are looking for a way in. There is a group of folks in the middle that we're older, but we're not dead yet. And looking for alternatives to the apprenticeship program. I really like what I'm hearing about the concept of mentors. I think that might be what this group in the middle needs, because they're operating, they're building ranches and farms. Is there any opportunity to grow that, any value in that?
Yeah, so I got a chance to talk with a bunch of folks during the Ag Apprenticeship Learning Network gathering, and I think I'm looking at Drew right now, but I think Drew is still here. I've seen some models where they have sort of much more part-time mentors. A lot of times if you're an apprentice, you're taking, 8 months, a year, a couple years out of your life, and you're like, great, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this full time. And that's not an opportunity sometimes if you've already started a family, you've already started your own operation. So some of those, they might help you either get through a certification process. They might help you, particularly help you match with somebody. Let's say you are doing, like a smaller side enterprise that you want to take on, or just somebody who you can call when, everything goes wrong and you're like, I have never seen this before. What do I do? And even if it isn't we were talking earlier that sometimes some of that mentorship and support that comes out is not just about fixing problems. It's about being heard and being wow, I don't know how to help you either, but sometimes it just helps to be you are not alone in that struggle. Do any of you have other examples that you would want to talk about?
I guess one thing I would add on the flip side is I see it a lot with my dad. He'll say, geez, you're 25 years old and you figured that out. It took me until I was 42 to know that, And so in that middle age range, I think is the perfect time to share what you've learned with young people who are going to be looking for a career soon. Maybe open up your operation and let the young people in and show them areas where you're sourcing things from or different companies that you have to use, and offer them the idea of you can be involved in agriculture no matter what your career is. Every one of us eat, we wear clothes, we are in buildings, right? And that's all provided by agriculture. And just showing them that maybe I'm not ready to pass over my land for you to manage yet, but there's still ways that you can be involved in supporting my operation and supporting other ag operations, whether that be becoming a grow the grower trainer or a certify verifier or something like that.
I'll just add that we've consciously, with the model we got from AFSC and the way we've adapted it, is that we know people have lives to live, and we're also aware that the folks we want to serve can't not have other economic opportunities. So it's part-time. It's 3 6-hour days a week, and there's also a stipend. So that's our middle ground, and that's not just for young people. So people can continue working part-time jobs, working on their own farms, and kind of mesh all of those things together. And as long as you're relatively local, then this location works for you.
I would add, like I said earlier, everything is relational. So if you're looking for being a mentor or looking for mentorship. Like there's opening up your operation to young people, and I like that idea. This is new farmers, not young farmers, because there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who are embarking in this endeavor that are not young. But you do some research, find out find somebody whose goals kind of match your own, and who's producing what you want to produce, who's producing in a similar climate, producing. There's just really, it really comes down to relationships, where it's all relational. We're all connected. There's even though I know a lot of farmers, we're not the friendliest. Like, people can be kind of grumpy, but they really want to pass on knowledge, and so like like I said, I know the way I learned by my dad, and my uncles. It was not it was not friendly learning, but people really are anxious to pass on knowledge. So just make relationships and pick people's brains.
That is very similar to what I was going to say. It's all about networks and knowing other people who are growing in your area. And you may have already started and picked up a piece of land and are not sure where to start and have no idea. And if you talk to your neighbor, they were in a similar situation 20 years ago, right? And it's just a matter of going out and finding those people. That's one of the reasons why I find it so important for our new crops of trainees to go and meet as many different farmers in the area, because not everyone's operation is going to look the same. Not everyone's land is going to look the same. Not everyone's goals and priorities are going to look the same. And over the course of the season, we've been able to meet all these different folks in agriculture, or ag adjacent, as I like to think, because not everyone has to be a farmer, but they can still support, right? And to be able to find opportunities for mentorship just in folks that are already there on the ground doing the work, and helping folks realize that this is just the beginning, right? We just helped get your first year solid and assisted with some resources, but really what it's going to come down to for everybody who's starting a new operation or an existing operation is, again, that collaborative nature of knowing who to call when I didn't get my sweet potato slips in time, right? Shout out to Jack. Or even being taught, how to start cover cropping or something like that. Like, we have all these specialists in our area, and we don't necessarily have to know it all, and being able to plug into the right people and know who to call.
I'll be brief. I would say, probably one of the most critical things for folks that are in the middle right now is getting the conversation started about exit strategy. I think that's extremely important for a beginning farmer, somebody launching a business. We know chances of launching a successful business after 5 years is pretty dismal. For agriculture, it's a lot harder. So the more resiliency we can plan in, the more we can have those tough conversations, the better. When Kathy asked us to raise our hands if we had a will yesterday, half of us raised our hands. I think starting those conversations as early as possible about exit strategy is imperative, because it helps you work through those difficult things and gets those ideas going of ways you can give back, ways that you might be able to integrate people onto the farm. Sometimes something as simple as letting somebody have a small egg operation on that farm, and they tend that before they go to the city to work. All of a sudden you have somebody and some security. So if there's a medical emergency, or God forbid you want to take a vacation, you have somebody dependable that you trust, that knows how to stick the paperclip in the tractor to start it, to help feed that morning. I think getting those conversations started earlier, the better, before there's so much emotion laden within all of these difficult decisions and conversations you have to have. I would say would be probably the first thing to really start on for folks in the middle, to really get this stuff going, before your back's up against the wall. Because the last thing we want to do is have some of our largest assets as just a back pocket savings account. We really want to make sure that we're going to shepherd these things to the future, to make sure they stay in working order and keep our working lands working. I think we're all here this weekend talking about regenerative agriculture and really creating these perennial systems that are going to ideally help save us all as a civilization. Last thing we want to see is all of that carbon disappear back into the atmosphere if we don't have somebody tending it.
Well, thank you all. Sort of along those lines of networking, I do hope that if I wished we'd had more time for questions, but I hope that you all can reach out to us and let us know if you'd like to talk further. And I want to invite Sarah up to the stage.
Thank you all for being here. I'm going to invite a different crowd of people up to the stage, yeah? But I thought, Monica, what you were going to say is I want to invite everybody to come to Career Connection tonight from 5:30 to 6:30. That'd be a great place to come ask these folks more questions about their work and to meet folks who are offering up mentorship and folks who are seeking mentors. So 5:30 to 6:30 this evening. And with that, I'm going to invite you all to leave the stage.